Bienvenue, welcome once again to another property podcast. This is Property Quorum, a bit of a gangbusters where we get together a bunch of property experts to debate a particular topic. Today's topic is one that's very much in the eye of a lot, maybe not the public eye, but it should be, the home buying maze. Who can navigate it? Indeed. And to start us off, as ever, Hamish McClay.
Appropriate timing, we think, certainly with some of the aspects. We're fortunate today not only to have our usual colleagues on the scene with Silas and Zara, but joining us today for the first time is Paul. And the particular topic of today that we're speaking about is the challenge, the maze that we need to go through within conveyancing. And everybody sort of here is involved one way or another with that particular sort of maze. And it's good to know actually that Paul can potentially offer a solution to part of that particular sort of maze. So we've got certain aspects in terms of what we do at Search and Convey. We have many challenges to do with searches, local authority searches, particularly with so many changes actually sort of going through, which are holding things up enormously in some cases. And of course, Zara has to contend with these continuous sort of changes in law that are going through to actually sort of just add to what we're already doing, what's already taking place in the world of conveyancing. So we've got some people who can actually sort of just revitalize the challenges that we face, but also explain that there are solutions to some aspects of it.
Paul, would you do me the honour of explaining to people who are perhaps less educated than you about what the actual challenge is?
Well, I think it's probably quite widely known now in the property sector, although occasionally we are still coming across the odd firm that it's news to. But essentially from the 18th of May this year, law firms that wish to continue submitting SDLT forms need to register with HMRC. There are some variances on that date depending on whether the business is a limited company or effectively whether they're in the tax structure at the moment. But essentially the registration opens from the 18th of May, and the likelihood is that by the October time at least, if you haven't registered, you won't be able to continue submitting stamp duty returns.
But that seems all perfectly fine, Paul. Why could anyone have a query with that?
Yeah, I mean it's controversial to say the least, because I don't think anybody in the property world would ever say that they signed up to be a tax advisor. I often say to people I'm talking to, my better half is a conveyancer of 20-something years. I won't be exact for her benefit, but a long time. And I'm sure she would also, like most people in the property world, say the same thing, that we're not tax advisors. Why are we being branded with this title? And I think the challenge comes from law firms, and you can imagine I've had lots of conversations with firms, various degrees of it. Some, to be fair, who actually were already looking at outsourcing. So nothing to do with this. They'd already made the decision that there were too many queries, too many difficulties, too many errors, of which are often not in the public domain because nobody shouts about those, of course, but it's been going on for a long time. Through to firms, actually, they've never heard of this. I've spoken to a firm last week that said, we've had an email from you, what's this about? So there's a real kind of, which that in itself is an issue. And in fact, this is an interesting one. I had a call with a firm the other week, and she was most disgruntled that it was our marketing that had raised this to her attention. When she looked into it, she wasn't disgruntled with us. What she said was, why have the Law Society not made more of this? And she said to me, well, it seems they've spent more time trying to fight this than actually raising the profile of it, which is equally important. But I thought it's a good point that there are still people out there that aren't aware. Bear in mind, we've now got 2 months until registration opens.
Zara, somebody reliably told me that tax advisors make a fortune. Surely this might be a good muse then. You guys can all double your charges.
Well, the thing is, we're not giving tax advice, but we're stuck in a catch-22 because we can't actually outsource it because of lender requirements. So this is run by David Keithley, who is the Law Society rep for residential conveyancing. And I know other people have taken other avenues to try and raise its profile because it's idiotic, and it seems like Angela Rayner is out to get revenge because she didn't want to pay for the tax advice when her conveyancers told her that they were not tax advisors. It is a self-assessed tax, and so she thought she knew best and did what she felt like it, and now she's paying the consequences. Now this conflicts with MHCLG's objectives, which is to make conveyancing cheaper. So all this is going to do is add up costs. It's, the tax advisors, the one I refer to, he charges £500 plus VAT an hour. So I'm clearly in the wrong business.
Absolutely. We all are.
Half a conveyancing fee.
Silence. I love a good slogan. Make conveyancing cheap again. Sounds like something similar. But laughing to one side, why would she do this? Surely she's punishing everyone and hitting everyone with the same stick.
Well, if it is Angela Rayner who's behind this, I'm sure that she's going to be able to afford her stamp duty costs on the basis of the enormous fee that she's getting from the Property Market Conference, of course, talking to all estate agents about the housing market. So make of that what you will. But look, I think there's a really serious point here that Zara sort of touched on, which comes down to the conveyancing industry as a whole being lumped with more and more and more requirements to do at a time when their fees are not increasing, or if they are, they're increasing marginally, or many lawyers are afraid to put their fees up. And I come from a background where you have the individual specialisms because that's what people train for. So just as you wouldn't go to a GP for brain surgery, you shouldn't be going with respect to a conveyancer for tax advice. And those two roles should be distinctly different. And you, in my view, you get what you pay for. So conveyancing has an interesting challenge upon it that their fees aren't rising. They're being burdened with more and more work. About 90% of all conveyancers want to leave the profession because they've had enough. And my view is, when are they going to turn around and say, enough? The regulators or the professional bodies are not fit for purpose. They're creating more problems than they're actually solving. It's not good for the practitioners. It's not good for the consumers to have burnt out conveyancers who aren't making enough money, handling the biggest purchase of their entire life. I think something fundamental needs to change. And that's where I'm a big fan of people coming together, not necessarily as a protest, but I think protesting needs to be the first step to get people to stop, look and listen, and then take forward sensible proposals that would either outsource the issue to the relevant professionals, or it's handled in such a way that in-house professionals are brought into each law firm and fees are distributed accordingly. But this cannot be in the best interest of the consumer, which is ultimately what these professional bodies purport to want to put first.
I think there's been a long history where forcing professionals to take on extra tasks doesn't end well.
No, not at all. Every report or survey that's coming out of the legal profession right now suggests that conveyancers are fundamentally overburdened. And it's not just in the conveyancing sector. You can look at the wider legal profession. You can look at what's happening in the legal sector as far as criminal prosecutions are concerned, and this need to ban jury trials because apparently that takes up too much time and resource, which is a complete nonsense, but we'll put that to one side. I really do think we are devoid of strong leadership to lead us through these challenges. And as a consequence, there's this top-down mechanism of, oh, that's a good idea, we'll do that. Oh, who's going to do that? Oh, we'll put that onto the conveyancers then. Well, are they really the appropriate people to be doing this? It's like having unqualified, doctors and nurses on the NHS running around doing all sorts of manner of medical experiments because, they're in the medical profession. I just don't think it's right.
Paul, there's already a dearth of fraud within the SDLT and potentially just more and more ambulance chasers.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the interesting thing from our side is that whilst the tax registration position seems to have now put this obviously in the spotlight, because there's a big difference now. Law firms have to make a decision. But the reality is there's a question mark even before that as to why are law firms still tasked with doing stamp duty land tax returns? Because this isn't something which is it's not necessarily about the HMRC registration. There are if you were to look, for example, at the case studies that we have on our site, we have this on a regular basis where clients have come to us because the law firm has done the return or done the calculation and it's incorrect. And that's not me saying that's the law firm's fault. That's because, as Zara was saying, there's this expectation that within quite often a fixed fee, depending on what sort of model you work on, you're expected to still do this. And how do you then do that? How do you then sort of say, well, actually, this is, this requires some specialist advice because you've already quoted a fixed fee. And then the other side of that is, how do you know? People will say, well, we can tell when it's a difficult one. If it's a difficult one, we'll get a tax advisor in. Looking at the numbers of returns that go through every single year, and these stats are out there, and the amount that are amended afterwards, it's crazy because there are so many mistakes going on. And there's one on our site at the moment where a law firm had told a client there was no stamp duty payable. There was. It came back to us to calculate it. It wasn't a huge amount in the end, but it was payable. And technically, of course, that client is still liable for it. It's their liability. But I'll guarantee that client will be digging their heels in saying, 12 months ago, you told me there was nothing to pay. Now, I don't know, who's that fair on? It's not probably fair on the client. It's not probably fair on the law firm either. But that was one that ultimately bounced through to Compass. We looked at it. There was £3,500 payable, now plus fines, now plus interest. What's realistically the chance that actually that law firm will end up paying that out of the office account to make it go away? I don't know. It will depend on the law firm's own views. But I wear quite a few hats as well as working with Compass, and I work with law firms in various different guises. And this goes on fairly regularly, where mistakes are made, and the law firm ends up paying out of office. So it won't even turn into a PII claim because obviously it has to be a certain amount before that really makes sense. So even apart from the tax registration position, is it right that actually law firms are doing this? Because actually, if it's sent out to tax, maybe that deals with this ambulance chasing idea, because then they're not chasing the law firms anymore.
Zara, is there a ton more training that should happen now that everybody's forced to be a tax advisor?
Well, I mean, we all get training, but the training is to know when you need to outsource, because most people's situations are straightforward. But we're reliant on the information the client gives us. So if they're not honest, how are we to blame?
And of course, there's the spectre of shared ownership.
Yeah, I mean, I rang HMRC saying this bit's missing from your guidance on the stamp duty page. They literally just said to me, "Don't care, do what the hell you like," and it's just like that's not helpful. And even Sean Randall, who I've collaborated with on shared ownership resources to do the stamp duty advice, it can get very complicated depending on what you're doing. I get a lot of sellers coming to me saying, "I've seen your article, but my solicitor won't put through the simultaneous sale exemption, so I don't have to pay stamp duty when I'm simultaneously selling and staircasing." So, people don't want to pay an extra £500 plus VAT for the advice. They just don't want to pay that. And that's probably what Angela Rayner did. She thought, I'm going to save a few bob and not get the advice. Who's going to know?
Well, you only know when it all goes belly up. Paul, surely organisations like you should be making hay. Everybody's going to outsource to you. Hurrah!
Well, obviously we hope so, but I mean the reality is this isn't new for us. We've had clients that have been using this system for years. So whilst it's new for a lot of the organisations have popped up all of a sudden saying, hey, we do stamp duty help, we can help you with this. Compass has spent £2 million developing tech over the last 5 years. We've got clients that have been outsourcing SDLT to us now for the best part of that time. So it's these changes have obviously from a marketing point of view, it's been great PR for us. We won't lie about that. But what it's actually done, I think, is even those firms that have they may be reluctant and they may be, angry about the changes. But what it has done is, as Zara said, it's reminded people that why are we doing this anyway? Regardless of HMRC, why are we doing this? Because there are regularly issues with stamp duty returns. This isn't something that happens once in a blue moon. So why are we putting ourselves out there for this? And we developed a model for law firms, which, as much as I'd like it to be £500 an hour, it's not £500 a matter. So it's nothing like that, because the reality is if the option was here, let's outsource this to accountants or tax advisors, and they won't be able to cope with the volume. That's the other side of this. They won't be, you go to your local accountant. I had this with one firm, said, we're thinking about outsourcing this to our local accountant. I said, well, how many transactions do you do a month? We do about 80. Right. So is your local accountant geared up to do 80 a month? And how much on earth are they going to charge you as an accountant for this? How does that work then? Are you going to add it onto your fees? Are you going to tell the client to go direct? That model doesn't work either. Certainly, again, it works when you're going to outsource 1 in 100, but not at a volume. So I think we're in a very different position in that we do the calculation, we liaise with the client, and we do the submission as well. So it's quite a different model and it's certainly not something that accountants are offering, because we work on a flat fee basis. So it's we've done 12,000 returns since Compass started. So I don't know what other people are doing. I can't imagine anyone else has done that, because I think there's a lot that have popped up, and there's a lot that have been very noisy in the last 3 months. Right. I think some of those models are a little bit opaque, completely opposite of what the SRA transparency rules tell you. If you look at what's out there, and accept it's my job to say this, but there are a lot out there where they're trying to do sort of I would almost call it lead generation. We'll do a low cost kind of pretend check of your SDLT, and I'll guarantee 50% of them will come back saying you now need further advice, and it's X hundreds of pounds. We've taken a different view, which is well above my pay grade in the organisation, because over 12,000 returns, we've got a very good idea what percentage are simple, medium, and complex. So the model is a flat fee, regardless of transaction price, regardless if it's residential or commercial, and regardless of the complexity. And essentially, it's a blended approach. We will win on most, we hope, and we will likely lose on some in terms of the time taken to do the calculation. But that's the only model we see that works for the law firms, works for the clients, and meets SRA transparency rules. Because I can't see how you can quote and say someone's going to check this SDLT and it's £50, and then 50% of them are then hit with, we noticed it's shared ownership. That's now £500, or I know maybe I'm wrong, and the truth of it is the market hasn't been going along in terms of this new phase, hasn't been around long enough for us to really know. But I suspect there'll be some people that are quite surprised when they sign up to a scheme or a service that actually doesn't deliver for the majority of calculations, I would have thought.
Well, that seems like fighting talk to me. Silas, are we going to man the barricades now? It does seem like we should rattle something.
Well, I heard a very interesting statistic this morning, and it's purely anecdotal, and I should probably say allegedly beforehand in order to protect us from potentially.
I would say before, middle, and at the end. Yes, carry on. So
allegedly, HMRC have allegedly failed every audit for the last 30 years, allegedly, which points us to an interesting part of our sort of global governance system, if you like, in terms of these organizations are out there dictating to all of us what should be being done, and it's the kind of the pot calling the kettle black. If HMRC are allegedly failing these audits, it doesn't really look good when it's trying to impose upon other professionals what needs to be done. And this is where I do come back to that point. You see, in any profession, whether it's a state agency or conveyancing, you're going to have the best of the best. You're going to have the average practitioners, and you're going to have the rest at the bottom. Now, the guys at the bottom just don't really care. They're going to cut corners. They're going to charge low fees. They're going to let the client deal with the consequences and live and die by the sword, as we saw with the example of PM Law recently. You've got the guys in the middle who will kind of move either way, depending upon what the client's saying. But you've got the best of the best who are seeing their profession being brought into disrepute. They're sick and tired of maintaining really high standards themselves, only to see others dragging the profession down. And those are the guys and girls like Zara, like many others in this industry, that need to take a stand and say, enough. This is not good. We're going to stand up to the regulator. They're there to regulate, not to impose, in my view. And I think that is something that's desperately needed, urgently needed, across the entire property profession, because we have got these things. These are not isolated incidents. If we look time and again, week after week, these things are cropping up. And the one who's bearing all of the risk, all of the financial uncertainty, is the client. And I think it's radically time for a change.
Wow. How the times moved on. Hamish, would you care to take us home?
The topic today was meant to be the maze. We have only spoken about a very, very small part of that maze today. And there's no surprise that conveyancing can be taking that much longer when you bring in all of these new things that the part of the client doesn't know about. And it's fantastic. One of the great things about speaking to Zara on an ongoing basis, she tells us some of these clients, they just want to get into the property. They know absolutely nothing. And also, it would appear that sort of certain conveyancers within the chain know absolutely nothing. So they're going to compound the hold up. There's a client there. They just want to get into that property. There's a lot of emotion involved with this. And there's so much within that maze for people to try and work their way through. This was a small part. We're fortunate indeed to have Paul with us to come and explain, if you like, this new, because I didn't realize, I try and keep my eye on what's going on. I didn't realize it was coming in so soon.
Right.
So the time is right now for solicitors to make a choice. We will need to extend our conversation about additional aspects of the maze in due course. However, I think it's a very, very important way. And there are part solutions, but as Zara said, and certainly Silas said, there shouldn't be a need for this anyway. But either way, Paul's solution for many a client is absolutely superb, because when you look at the fees that they would be charging to do this, and it's great to be able to speak about a solution. If it was on board and the clients were actually doing it directly, it takes everything away from that solicitor, and the solicitor just doesn't need to worry about it at all, because it's nothing to do with their PII. It's all down to Compass and the experts at Compass for this ridiculously low fee. I say ridiculously low fee. It's a competitive fee because the team have worked it out what it is going to cost. It's much the same as what I do in terms of my business with common searches. Many of them will just go and it's dead easy. However, there's some which take hours to actually sort of get the information on.
Right.
And that flat fee can be a very, very effective thing, because it's so demoralizing, as Zara would explain, for all of these people. They're told what it's going to, and all of a sudden we need this extra and that extra and that extra.
And so I believe this is a topic we will return to, at least the property maze itself. But for now, thank you so much, Zara Olibukas, for keeping it real, as it were. Paul Coombs for offering a solution. Silas J. Lees for sitting back and not biffing Angela Rayner on the nose, allegedly, and Hamish McClay for having set this up in the first place. And to all of you for watching. We do a number of these shows. The next one is a great show called Cladding Mashers tomorrow, I believe at 1 o'clock, unless we announce otherwise. So I hope to see some of you there. But until next time, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and in these troubled times, look after that mental health. Until next week. Bye-bye.